I am Ashutosh Kumar. I happen to be a professor of political science in Punjab University. I also am the principal coordinator of this EPG Pathshala in the subject of political science. In this module, we discuss about the different perspectives on the nature of Indian state. So first we discuss that what do we mean by state, and there we have both liberal as well as Marxist perspective, and we also have a Gandhian perspective on the nature of the state, modern state, and that is reflected in the writings of this module. So as you read the module, you would find that after decolonization, everybody agreed that Indian state had a huge task of achieving development. It had the task to bring about nation building, institution building. It also had to fight social evils. It had to also bring about overall development, not only the development in the social terms, but also development in the regional terms. Now in this module we discuss why state was given so much task and why Indian state enjoyed so much legitimacy and acceptance among the vast masses of India. In this module we discuss that it might have been because the state elite, the people who led the state, who were at the helm of the affairs, they had played a very important role in the freedom struggle. They were seen as sacrificing people. They were seen as the people who had been able to rise over and above the sectional interest. So that's why there was so much confidence. There was also this influence of the modernization theory and political development theory, where there was a role of this modernizing elite, the Western educated, the elite which had the modern values inculcated in their consciousness, who took over the task of modernizing. The modernization work or the modernizing the nation was undertaken by the Indian state. Then in this module, we discuss about the different writings, academic writings on the nature of the Indian state. We see in this module that the Marxist writers who have been theorizing about the nature of the Indian state, they have been given different kind of interpretations. But all the Marxists, as we would see while going through the module, we would see that all the Marxists agreed that in India it is not the one class, there is no one single ruling class. Rather, there are ruling classes. And they all agree that there is a ruling class alliance or there is a ruling class bloc. And these ruling classes, there is a difference of opinion among the Marxists. Some people would say that it is basically the capitalist class, the foreign capitalist class, or you can say the metropolitan capitalist class, and the indigenous local capitalist class. They are in alliance and they are ruling over Indian state, and Indian state is basically an instrument in the hands of the metropolitan bourgeoisie, and there is a continuation of imperialism in the new form. So it's a neo-imperialism, and it's a kind of a neo-imperialist or colonial mode of production, as Hamza Alavi would talk about, and they would refer to the insufficient transition from feudalism to capitalism in Indian context. Then there would be other Marxists like Kaviraj, we are going to discuss Kaviraj, Pranab Bardhan, then Hamza Alavi. They all would speak about the three classes having a kind of alliance. They would talk about the capitalist class, they would talk about the agricultural class, the rich agricultural class, rich peasantry. Pranab Bardhan would say rich peasantry, industrial capitalist class, and the public sector professionals. And these three classes forming the ruling class alliance and ruling collectively over India. So that's another perspective given by the Marxist theorist. But then as we can see that they all agree that there is a ruling class alliance, and they privilege the secondary view of Karl Marx. As we know that the Karl Marx referred to the primary view and the secondary view. The primary view was that state is an instrument in the hands of the capitalist class, or whosoever class is the owning class, and the state tries to, as an instrument, tries to subserve the interest of the owning classes at the cost of the subordinate classes. That means that state uses the coercive as well as the ideological apparatus at its command to subserve the interest of the dominant ruling classes. So that is one perspective about the nature of the Indian state. Here you can also have the perspective of the Communist Party of India. The Communist Party of India also would have its own perspective about the nature of the Indian state. Now we go to the another perspective, and that would be the Gandhian perspective. As we know, in this module we would see that Gandhi was always in favor of decentralized polity. Gandhi was never in favor of a kind of a polity where all the power would be centralized in the institution of the state. So Gandhi was of the opinion that there should be decentralized polity, and there should be a kind of a state. The basic unit of political governance should be a village or a Gram Swaraj, and not the modern state or a centralized state. Then we have the neoliberal perspective on the nature of the Indian state, and under the neoliberal perspective, there is a theorization about state being able to rise over and above the sectional interest, Indian state being a welfareist state, Indian state being a developmental state, Indian state trying to reconcile the different interests. And then it also refers to, in this module, refers to the 5-year plan, and how it shows that under the 5-year plan it was not only the industrial sector, but even the agricultural sector was not neglected. So for industrialization purposes, unlike the erstwhile Soviet Union, or unlike China, or unlike the Western advanced capitalist countries, in India the agricultural sector was not exploited for producing the surplus, economic surplus, which would be used for development of the heavy industries. So that way the liberal approach is about Indian state being a developmental state, Indian state being a democratic state, Indian state being a state which has brought welfare, overall development, and which has stood for the preservation of the rights of the people, including the minorities, including the socially and the economically marginalized social groups. So these are the three different viewpoints on the nature of the state: Indian state, Marxist perspective, Gandhian perspective, as well as the liberal perspective. Then we can also refer that there are some people who believe that Indian state is a coercive state. So those who belong to the far left ideology, the CPML and all Naxal forces, they reject Indian state being an independent state. They see Indian state being an instrument in the hands of the propertied classes and working to the detriment of the common masses, and that's why they reject the state institutions, bourgeois institutions, as sham, and they believe in destroying the state institutions. So these are the different viewpoints about the nature of the Indian state, which we are going to discuss in this module. Like we take the Hamza Alawi, a very noted name, a neo-Marxist. Hamza Alawi argues that the Indian state was playing the role of a mediator between the interest of the foreign and the national capital. And he argued that the foreign aid played considerable role in strengthening the unequal partnership between the foreign and the Indian capital, and as a result, what was happening was that the foreign capital was able to establish its domination over weak national bourgeoisie or native bourgeoisie, and so in a way post-colonial state was basically a kind of mediating force which had attained the status of relative autonomy, mediating between the foreign capitalist class and the local local or indigenous capitalist class. So Alawi also saw the ruling Congress party as a party not of a single class, rather it was a party which was upholding the interest of different property classes. You also have Suniti Kumar Ghosh, who also argues that Indian state lacked the independent character of its own and was comprador in nature. T.V. Satyamurthy is another person who has argued that the Indian state was dependent on the foreign capital. He acknowledged the fact that the Indian capitalist class had emerged during the colonial period from the complex interaction with colonial power on the one hand and the trading landed classes on the other. But in any case, Satyamurthy also did not give any autonomy to the local capitalist class. Then we have Sudipta Kaviraj, a very important and a noted Marxist, who has argued that there was no single class which dominated the Indian state. Sudipta Kaviraj argues in terms of a ruling bloc or a ruling coalition which consists of the three distinct classes. First, the bourgeoisie, particularly its aggressive and expanding monopoly section of the bourgeoisie. Second, the landed elite that experienced significant changes due to the progress of agricultural transformation since independence. And third, the bureaucratic and the managerial elite, especially high bureaucratic elite and industrial management classes. All the three classes, according to Kaviraj, did not share equal power, rather arranged in evidently hierarchical manner. Michel Kalicki has come out with the concept of intermediate regime in which the alliance of the lower middle classes and the rich peasantry controlled the state power. K. Balagopal is another Marxist who has argued that the Indian state inherited two major responsibilities. One was to keep the diverse bunch of property classes in India together, and the second was to gain the loyalty of the extremely restless mass of peasantry and the workers. If we review the literature, Marxian literature or the Marxist literature, those intellectuals who drew their conclusion about the nature of the Indian state from the Marxian literature, they all agreed to the fact that the Indian state has not emerged as a autonomous bourgeois democratic state after industrial revolution. In fact, they all have argued that Indian state is an autonomous state, but it is also not dominated or ruled by a single class, but by a combination of the property classes. And they all have argued in terms of articulation of modes of production, in the sense that the feudal mode of production has persisted, whereas the capitalist mode of production has been on ascendance. In fact, the difference starts from this point, because some the intellectuals, the Marxist intellectuals, do not agree which are these classes, which are these ruling classes who form the ruling class bloc or ruling class alliance. You can also refer to Pranab Bardhan, who has argued in terms of ruling classes, and he talks about the industrial capitalist class, the rich peasantry, and the professionals in the public sector. So all the classes, all the Marxist intellectuals, they have talked in terms of relative autonomy, nature of the state, drawing from the secondary writings of Karl Marx, which Karl Marx and Engels wrote about in the both like Civil War in France, class struggle in France, or 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. So the instrumentalist view, which was there in the Das Kapital or the Communist Manifesto, that is not evident in the writings of the intellectuals when they write about the nature of the Indian state. Now we come to the developmental state. Now when we refer to the functions of the Indian state, one of the important functions was to get rid of economic backwardness. Economic exploitation by the colonial rule became one of the major critiques of the Indian freedom struggle. It became the dominant argument that the colonial regime was hindering the further development of India. The colonial rule was regarded as an exploitative force, creating and perpetuating a backward economy. The colonial rule became illegitimate due to exploitation, drain of national wealth, destruction of productive system, and creating backward economy, as Partha Chatterjee argues. Partha Chatterjee, and also we have other authors who have argued that the economic backwardness was a consequence of a colonial regime, which itself became a cause of the other forms of backwardness in independent India. The resolution of the Congress Party in May 29 stated that in order to remove the poverty and misery of the Indian people and to ameliorate the conditions of the masses, it was essential to make revolutionary changes in the present economic and social structure. Jawaharlal Nehru's writings have also been very instructive in this context. Now, on the eve of the independence, India was to be characterized as a nation with little industrialization, low agricultural output, low figure of national per capita income, and a very slow economic progress, considerable unemployment and underemployment. The new Indian state was assigned the task of development of one of the poorest nations in the world in 1947. The developmental ideology became a consistent part of the self-definition of the state. There was an overwhelming consensus among several sections of the society, mainly vast range of political leadership, businessmen, economists, administrators, that the development was possible only in a planned economy, and that's why development planning was adopted. Then we can refer in this context the Congress Working Committee Resolution 1937, and then the National Planning Committee Constitution, which was headed by Jawaharlal Nehru. Then we can refer to the Bombay Plan, which came up in 1944. All these documents underlined the need to have a development planning model for India. We can also refer to the writings of Sukhma Chakravarti and V.K. R.V. Rao, the two people who have defended the development planning model. We can refer to the second five-year plan in this context, which under the guidance of Mahalanobis shifted its focus on to the heavy industries, and that has continued till the present times. So this has been the viewpoint that the state has to act as a major economic actor, and it had to develop the heavy industry because the heavy industry would produce job and it would have a better growth potential. The private sector was also allowed to continue, but the state was to intervene in those areas where the private sector was not prepared to invest. So private sector was also allowed to continue, but the public sector was given much more responsibility to take responsibility in the social sector to combat poverty, unemployment, and to intervene in the health sector and the educational sector to provide opportunity structures to the common people. There was, just after the first 2 years of independence, this is very important, that the Indian government allowed 14 new joint ventures with the foreign majority ownership. By this time, the principal opposition to the foreign private capital was identified to be a hangover from the colonial past. So gradually we find that the foreign capital was welcome to India by the ruling classes. So there was this reconciliation with the foreign private capital, and gradually there was this establishment of the chambers like the FICCI in March 1959, which also favored the foreign investment for agricultural and industrial growth. So on the one hand, the Indian state intervened in the core economic sector like the health, education, industries, and all social as well as core industrial sector. Then at the same time, there was no neglect of the agricultural sector also. The land reforms were very much on the agenda, but it remained a distant dream for the rural poor peasantry and the landless laborers. So there was a limitation on the part of the government to be able to enforce the land reforms measures in rural India. The problems of inadequate domestic resource mobilization, increasing poverty, price rise, unemployment continued in the decade of 1970s. It was a period in which there was a great promise of populist promises like Garibi Hatao and a word socialism, which symbolized pro-poor policy regime, was added to the preamble of the Indian Constitution. Poverty became a political issue when Mrs. Gandhi became the Prime Minister and she became the colossal leader of the Congress Party. The model of development till 1980s consisted of large public sector units, heavy industry, bed dams, roads and mines. Dams were considered as the temples of modern India, legacy of Nehruvian India that continued even in later period. With all the economic and political crises, India entered into a period of 1980s. Rather than generating domestic resources, it opted for further deep integration with foreign technology and foreign capital as a solution of all the ills of economy and society. On one hand, the government continued with huge foreign borrowings, deficit financing and indirect taxation, as Nandita Shah in her writing points out. But on the other hand, there was also a progressive reduction in the direct taxation rates. So in Nehruvian India, the resources were generated as a result of very high taxes, foreign aids, and also with the help of the domestic saving. But now there was a renewed emphasis on the foreign direct investment. We have this important year 1991 when Dr. Manmohan Singh, the then finance minister in the Congress party, led the minority government, delivered his budget speech and reiterated the globally accepted arguments that there is no alternative apart from opting for privatization and liberalization. In his speech, Dr. Manmohan Singh warned India that there was no time to lose. Any further delay in the macroeconomic adjustment would make the balance of payment situation unmanageable and inflation would exceed beyond tolerance. The task ahead for him was to progressively reduce the fiscal deficit of the central government, reduce the revenue deficit and current account deficit in the balance of payment. The solutions proposed were to liberalize the policy regime for direct foreign investment, adopt austerity measures to encourage the accumulation of capital for the creation of wealth, reduce fiscal deficit by reducing the expenditure and increasing income of government, reduce number of subsidies, etc. Indian government opted for a new era of economic reforms by following neoliberal economic policy framework. The strategy under this framework was first to minimize the role of government in economic activities and to make it a minimal state. Second was to encourage private investment both by foreign and Indian corporate sector. Third was to take aid in the form of varieties of loans from the IMF and the World Bank. This in turn pushed India to abide by the prescription of the IMF through the program of a stabilization of economy and the structural adjustment program suggested by the World Bank. The prescription given by the World Monetary Institutions was for critically ill economies, and it was to control fiscal deficit, rising inflation, and the crisis of balance of payment. All these three crises were handled even at the cost of rising unemployment, poverty, and economic deprivation, as Amit Bhaduri and Deepak Nayyar point out in their writings. In the industrial sector, the license Raj was abolished and the investment decisions made no longer dependent upon the governmental approval. The laws which limit the growth of firms through merger or acquisitions were also abolished. The quantitative restrictions on imports and exports were also reduced in terms of reduction in the tariff and abolition of subsidies on exports. The policy regime for the foreign investment and foreign technology were also liberalized. With regard to the public order, the government not only reduced its activities in this sector, rather facilitated the closure of not only the loss-making units along with profitable ones. The sale of profitable and cash-rich public sector corporations like the BALCO in Chhattisgarh should be considered as an apparent example in this context. As far as the land reforms were concerned, the measures adopted fell dramatically short of their objectives, and that has been pointed out by the National Sample Survey data also. The gross domestic production, projected as the key factor of the growth, was also faltering as India recorded worse growth of around 6.9%, far below the dream target of 9 to 10% that was the target. As for the total employment was concerned, only 8% of the organized sector and the rest was engaged in the informal sector. So only 8% of the workforce was employed in the organized sector. Regarding poverty also, the National Commission on Enterprises in the Unorganized Sector Report 2006 estimated, and this was headed by Arjun Sengupta, estimated that nearly 77% of Indian population was living below the income of rupees 20 a day. that was 2006. This was the region that India ranked 65 in the 79 hungriest nation in the global hunger index. On the other hand, in 2013, India had 55 billionaires with average net worth of around rupees 190.8 billion. The write-offs to the corporate sector in form of exemption on corporate tax, excise and custom duty from 2005 to 2012 came to a startling figure of rupees 31.11 trillion. India ranked 5th in the world of billionaires on the Forbes list besides US, China, Russia and Germany. But our rank in the UNHDI 2013 was 136 out of 186 nations. The situation has not improved even in the recent times, though India has been one of the fastest growing economy, but in terms of HDI, in terms of GDI, India ranked very poorly across the in the hierarchy when it comes to the indexing the country. Gandhian perspective would be another perspective. Mahatma Gandhi, we know, was not in favor of modern state because it was the product of modern civilization, about which he was very critical. He was also critical of the state planning for mechanization and industrialization of economy. He was of the firm opinion that machinery, commercialization and centralization of power in the state were the curses of modern civilization. They were being imposed upon Indian people by the European colonialism. For Gandhi, industrialism itself rather than inability to industrialize was the root cause of Indian poverty. He also expressed his displeasure with the approach of the National Planning Committee 1937 regarding the economic future of India. He considered the efforts of this committee as waste, bringing forth little or no fruit. The modern civilization for Mahatma Gandhi was fundamentally flawed due to the fact that it was aggressive, imperialist, violent, exploitative, brutal, unhappy, restless, and devoid of a sense of a direction and a purpose. This flaw was the result of the fact that it privileged the body and neglected the soul as far as Gandhi was concerned. And so Gandhi argued that the Indian state or any modern state for that matter was driven by the principles of self-interest and undisciplined self-indulgence. It was inherently restless and lacked stability. It was materialist in nature and steered by greed and ruthless competition, as Bhikhu Parekh has summed up Gandhian view about the nature of Indian state. And in fact, Gandhi was also of the opinion that the modern state was to treat poor with contempt, weaker races were to be regarded as subhuman, and they were to be bought and sold, and the weaker nations would be conquered and mercilessly oppressed. So, in fact, we can see that Gandhi was also opposed to even the concept of liberal democracy, as it did little to integrate the state and society, decentralize political power, or involve citizens in the conduct of the public policy. So, if you see the Gandhian viewpoint, then the Gandhians have also argued in terms of the Swaraj as an alternative to the modern state. And Swaraj was for him a situation when the people would be free from the domination and coercion on the one hand, and would be institutionalized and nurtured to promote Lok Shakti, or what would be called people's power. We can refer to Jayaprakash Narayan and Vinoba Bhave as the two Gandhians who have spoken about the nature of the state. Especially Jayaprakash Narayan, Marxist turned Gandhian, raised the fundamental concern of the powerlessness of the masses and argued that even after independence, people were not still were getting involved. Narayan was deeply concerned with the gulf between the masses and their representative institutions like the government and the representative bodies. To awaken the peaceful people's power and to achieve social change, Jayaprakash Narayan declared that his goal was to accomplish total revolution. The fundamental objective of the total revolution was to bring real Swaraj based on the philosophy of Sarvodaya. As we conclude this module, we have referred to the different perspectives on the nature of the Indian state. We referred to Marxist perspective, we referred to Gandhian perspective, we referred also to the liberal perspective. We also refer to the development planning model, and also we refer to the new economic policies, the economic transition, how we have adopted in India in the last 25 years or so, especially after 1991, Manmohan Singh presenting his budget, the path-breaking, game-changing budget, which led to the initiation of the structural adjustment program and the kind of stabilization of the economy. And so now India is under the market economy. And so in this module, we discussed about the way Indian economy and Indian politics has evolved and how it has impacted on the nature of the Indian state. So basically we saw the interrelationship between democracy, development, and also how the democratic developments, how the political economy of development has impacted on the politics and the integration of the people in the political processes. So basically we saw that Indian state can be viewed from different perspective by the people having different ideological predilections. For Marxists, the state is essentially, Indian state is essentially subserving the interest of the dominant classes or the privileged elites. On the other hand, if someone is having a liberal perspective, can see Indian state as doing a credible job in bringing about development, to combat poverty, to combat the divisive forces, and also to establish a democratic regime which is based on the rights of the common people, and a state which has achieved a lot, not only in the political terms, in the procedural terms of democracy, but also in the economic terms, has turned a feudal state into a modern industrialized state. Gandhian perspective, of course, it has been marginalized, but as we know that Gandhian perspective also has had its impact over the nature of the Indian state, because there has been an emphasis on decentralization, Panchayati Raj system, and delegation of the powers, cooperative federalism. So overall we can see that we can have different perspectives on the nature of the Indian state. It's very difficult to have one definitive opinion about the nature of the Indian state. So what we need to do, that we should take into consideration the different perspectives on the nature of the Indian state and then draw our own conclusion.